So I think we'll get started because I, for one, know I want to have every minute of this hour to chat books with these three wonderful authors. So a quick introduction from me. I'm Sarah Odedinor. I'm an editor-at-large at Pushkin Press, and I'm joining these three fantastic authors, Hannah Gold, Piers Torday and Ellie Fountain, tonight to talk about writing and to talk about the theme of climate change in their books and in books generally, I think. I've got a couple of housekeeping things to mention before we kick off. If people have any questions, please do just pop them in the chat and I will attempt to keep up with that and give everybody a chance to, or some people a chance to ask their questions. And I also want to thank Tales on Moon Lane for partnering with us for this event. They're very kindly selling the books, and there is going to be a book bundle link in the chat box at some point. So if people want to buy the books, if you haven't already had them, please do look in the chat and you'll see a link there to get the three books. So I'd like to welcome our authors. Thank you very much for coming from your various places to chat to us tonight. And I'm going to do this in slightly alphabetical order. And Ellie, you get to be first on first name and surname. So Ellie Fountain is the author of 3 books for young readers, including her multi-award winning first novel, Boy 87, which really did launch her with a big splash on the world of children's literature. Her latest title, Melt, which was published in April, has been described as an urgent story of adventure and survival in a warming climate. And fans of Ellie Fountain, author of Boy 87 and Lost, will find plenty of white-knuckle drama in Melt about a boy living in a remote Arctic village threatened by the melting ice. The weather is changing and centuries of knowledge cannot keep up. And then we have Hannah Gold, whose first book we're talking about today, and it's The Last Bear, published by HarperCollins. It has been described as a moving story that will win the hearts of children the world over and show them that no one is too young or insignificant to make a difference. The Last Bear is a celebration of the love between a child and an animal, a battle cry for our world, and an irresistible adventure with a heart as big as the bear's. Beautiful.
I love that line.
And Piers Torday, he's the much loved author of several widely acclaimed, adored, best-selling, prize-winning books for young readers. His forthcoming book, The Wild Before, will publish in September this year. So I'm very lucky because I've had a chance to read it. And it's already being recognized as an absolute gem and is receiving wonderful praise, including this prequel to Torday's Last Wild trilogy is every bit as luminous as those beloved children's classics. The Wild Before is a stunning mixture of folklore, adventure, and environmental awareness. So thank you very much, you three, for joining us tonight. And I'm going to start with asking some questions. I read all 3 books and absolutely loved reading them. And I loved one of the most important things for me, which you all shared, I think, was this idea of allyship and cooperation. And when thinking about the issues in your stories, the solutions that you offer us as writers through the lives of your characters is how the characters act together to make a difference. Hannah, can I start with you, please, and ask you, why is this such an important element of your story?
Wow, kicking it off, everybody. It's lovely to be here as well, especially in such company. So thank you so much for having me, and hello to everybody that's here as well. I think for me, because actually April is this singular character, but we tap into the allyship with the polar bear, which is the sort of slightly unusual element to my book, I suppose. And it's that aspect that even a child and an animal can create a bond, and that there's no distinction, I don't think, between us, humankind, and the animal kingdom. And it is about respecting and understanding that and realizing there isn't any kind of separation. And when we think in that kind of mindset, that then, I don't know, it inspires us to sort of take care of them a little bit more. So it isn't like a sense of humans and then animals, it's the allyship between us, you know, and just recognizing they're just or even more as important as we are.
You also have allyship between characters, human characters in your book, though, don't you? Because she has her lovely cooperation with the boy on the boat.
Yes, yeah, that's Tor. I quite like Tor. I've got a soft spot for him. He has a fleeting part in a fleeting role, but everyone seems to like him. Yeah, because he's from that part of the world, the Arctic, and he's a metaphor, I suppose, for how different that part of the world is. And he teaches her, he's like a gateway into that part of the world. And so she has to rely, you're right, on his help in order to navigate this part of the world, particularly when she gets onto her rescue mission with Bear himself.
And Ellie, Bea and you two in Melt obviously work together very closely. How important is youthful allyship to you, do you think?
I think it's particularly important in this book for me because the main characters are both teenagers, and it's that time, particularly in a child's life, when they are starting to work out who they are, how they fit in, and you know how they appear on the outside with how they feel on the inside. And Bea's had a sort of accelerated version of that, moving from school to school to school. She's had quite an intense experience of trying to fit in, and she's sort of on the verge of giving up, whereas Yutu is sort of the opposite. He's always had the same sort of group of friends. He's always had this sort of solid, secure relationship with his friends, and he's ready to look beyond that. He wants to know if there's something else out there, and they meet at this point when they've both realised they're sort of searching for some way to fit in. Bea's sort of given up, Yutu's searching, and it's partly because of that Bea finds that she can connect with Yutu, because there are no sides to him, and you know he has nothing to prove. And although you know she has her defenses up at first, it is that friendship between the two of them that develops because they're both sort of ready, and they're both at that sort of stage in their young lives as well, when they're trying to explore sort of beyond what they've known up until now.
Lovely. And Piers, in your book, the little hare is trying to get everybody to be aware of the issues. How important are those characters, those roles in life as well for I mean, I must say, when I was reading the book, I was thinking a lot of people like Greta Thunberg and the way that they constantly bring to the fore the issues that we're facing. And he in the book is that character. How successful do you see those characters in helping us all realize the things that we're facing?
Well, I suppose, hello everyone, it's great to be here. I think there's different kinds of allyship, aren't there? Because there's friendship, which is such an important theme in children's books, and helping children understand how difficult situations, even crises, can be faced and overcome. But I also wanted to look at, in a child-friendly way, the question of political allyship, because climate change is a problem which we all face across the world. It cannot be defeated by individuals. And I am aware that a lot of children feel perhaps anxious or worried about climate change. And I really wanted to write a book that shows that when people work together, that change can happen. It takes a long time. It isn't always successful, but it's really important to believe that that's possible. We, to a degree, live in the age of the individual, and the power of collective political action has really been dented and blurred and throttled. And I feel it's really important to write books for a next generation of activists and organizers, just as Greta has been inspiring. I mean, I wrote the book because I was inspired by what Greta was calling for with her marches and school strikes and things like that, because I don't want children to be anxious, but I do want them to be politically active. And that can begin from a very young age. And the key to political success, as we know, is forming alliances and collaborations, coalitions. And whilst that or maybe sounds a bit top level political for the book, this is about animals. This is about a hare and some farm animals trying to work together, or in some cases not, to take on climate change, because it's too big a problem for people to face alone.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Such wonderful insights into your thoughts. I'm going to carry on talking to you for a minute, Piers, because your book is, while there is a bear in The Last Bear, obviously, your book is anthropomorphic. How helpful is it to have animal characters narrate a complex, political, sometimes quite difficult story?
It's hugely helpful, and I've always used animals in my books, from The Last Wild, which is obviously about climate change as well, but also other books like There May Be a Castle, which are about grief and death. And that is because I do think for young children, I think this kind of fiction is often a way of navigating vicariously adult experiences they are yet to have. Mm-hmm. And I think children are really hungry and keen to imagine what those experiences might be like. They know they exist. Trauma, death, excitement, action. But at the same time, of course, they are children, and no one wants to traumatize or upset a child. But through animals who are like children, often quite small and low to the ground. Well, a very big animal in Hannah's book, but not so low to the ground. But nevertheless, have this quality also because whether an animal talks anthropomorphically or is silent, they are vulnerable. Every animal on Earth, from a polar bear to a cockroach, is vulnerable to humans, and children are immensely vulnerable. And so I think they instinctively identify with those animal characters and can place themselves in their spot without feeling a human, someone in their family or a friend is at risk, which is a very different equation when you're writing a story.
Can I add to what Piers has just said?
Yes,
about
please.
Fiction, because that's such a really interesting point about the anthropomorphism in that fiction, and I guess what I just wanted to add was in the more general sense about fiction for children, and how fiction can often help to join up those dots, those things that children are seeing and hearing about in the news or from friends, and might feel sort of either overwhelmed by big phrases like climate change. How do you change the climate, or how do you change it back again? And you hear these snippets, and sometimes fiction can be a really great forum just in itself for children to explore these big ideas, sort of a safe space to climb inside the idea, because you're with the character, you're sort of experiencing these things and seeing these things through the character's eyes, and so you're sort of inside it, feeling what it might mean for you on a daily basis rather than in a news headline. And that's one of the reasons why I like fiction per se, for exploring big ideas as well.
Well, thank you. It also, I think, as Piers has said, and I think you're agreeing, Ellie, that it's the opportunity to vicariously experience something real, but that you're not in immediate danger, and you can learn your responses and feelings and polish your ideas about how to respond, where to sit, where you lie in terms of thoughts and opinions. Fiction's a very powerful medium, I think, for sharing and spreading ideas. Settings, two slightly similar settings and one very different setting. What was the choices, Hannah? Where did the idea, where did Bear Island come from, and why?
The idea, to be honest, I never set out to write a book about climate change. That wasn't my starting point. My starting point was this love of animals. which is just me through and through. And then the idea about the polar bear came. And it was only through my research into polar bear habitat and polar bear population numbers and where they lived that I then realized this abstract idea that they were in trouble became a lot more real when I started researching them. So I was like, okay, where am I going to set this book? And that's when I did stumble across this island called Bear Island, which is a real life island, which I talk about in the author's note of the book. And it's halfway between the mainland of Norway and Svalbard. And it really was called Bear Island because in the olden days, the ice caps would extend that far south that the polar bears could get there. But these days, because the ice caps have melted to such a degree, the polar bears can no longer reach the island, which ironically bears their name. And once I really found that out, it was like, well, there's only one story to tell. And so it was during the research of the Arctic region and the polar bears that I really, the scale of the problem really hit home. And it was actually quite upsetting to write and to research. And I'm really sensitive. I can't watch the David Attenborough documentaries without crying, literally. And I think, you know, going back to your previous point about fiction being a wonderful medium to tell these kind of these messages, is that there's a lot of sensitive children out there, particularly now with the pandemic, where we've very, very anxious about various things in the outside world. And for me, we've been living in a bubble, and a real literal bubble recently. And so the Arctic is so far removed from my everyday existence. And the idea was, how can we then make the Arctic real? How can we personalize a polar bear so we feel about this bear as much as we feel about our pet dog or our pet cat? So then how can we create this channel so we care enough that we can do something? So it's about bringing the Arctic to us and making it real and making the polar bear personable. And yeah, just telling that story with a lot of heart.
And Piers, a British farm?
Yeah, so the Wild Before is set on a British farm. It's a slightly strange farm because it appears to have every kind of stock animal and also mixed arable crops, which is quite unusual and unlikely. But the book, as people may come and read it, has a little more than a whiff of allegory about it. When I first wrote The Last Wild, one of the books that inspired it, which is a book about, in a sense, animals finding their voice against humans, was Animal Farm, which I think is pretty much one of my favorite books of all time, right up there, simply because it's just a perfect piece of storytelling that manages to be a great story in its own right. I enjoyed it as a child in one way, I enjoyed it as an adult in another. I think it's a book you can read it again and again, and I'm not remotely comparing The Wild Before to it, but in the sense it was an inspiration. And that farm setting, why I liked it for discussing the themes of climate change was it kind of, I didn't want to avoid the difficult questions that we face at home on Britain, about our own life, how sustainable is our food production. We all know the huge contribution that farming, agriculture makes to sort of climate change. And those are difficult questions without easy answers. So, and I kind of wanted to also look at something that I've missed a bit from children's books that I grew up with, which is the kind of English pastoral tradition of our own wildlife and countryside, which is disappearing and is under threat, from wildflowers to animals. I almost wanted to write a story that recorded all these things while they're still here, because it really is possible that many of them won't be. So it's a very domestic and not nearly as exciting a setting as the ones in Bear or Melt. But that's why I make quite exciting things happen in it.
Very exciting story, though.
It's a very exciting story.
Yeah.
Piers, before you take a big deep breath, globalization. I wanted to ask you and Ellie both about this, because the role of big business and the implication of their participation in what's going on in terms of the climate. You both address this in your books. How and why, Piers, what was your?
Well, the thing I wanted to sort of raise in the consciousness of children, as they sort of, because it's such a privilege to write for books for children this age, because I always feel on the one hand, you're hopefully telling them a story that is enjoyable as an entertainment, bit of escapism, they just lose themselves in and enjoy reading. But I know from my own experience, I feel that little thoughts were seeded as a child that I then developed as I grew older. And the thought I want to seed, which I think is so important, is don't take your eye off where the power is. Because in the end, the only thing that, if we are able to stop climate change, is power. And, you know, if one of those multinationals, fossil fuel companies, decided today, I mean, we've just heard that in a court case that Shell have been forced by a court to be carbon neutral by 2030, or cut their emissions at least, which is great. But when you think of the resources, the money, and the human capital at those companies' disposal, they could stop climate change. I'm not saying tomorrow, but they could stop it far quicker than we are trying to at the moment. It is turning a tanker around, but they have the power. Those companies and governments are the ones that have the power. And I really am so passionate that I think whilst every child will want to make a difference in their own way, and they must, and it's amazing and inspiring what they do, and must never let go of that either, they must all equally never feel it's their fault or it's all up to them, because it isn't. And it's the power, the real power to stop the Arctic disappearing lies in the hands of these companies and governments. And that may sound political for a children's book, but it's really a structural point actually about how life works on Earth. And it's hopefully a jumping off point for discussion in the classroom.
And Ellie, your characters are very much part of this world of big business.
Yeah, so Bee has led a very globalized life, if you like, traveling around with her father's job. He works as a geologist for an oil company. And Yutu has led almost the opposite life up until the point when they meet. He's lived in the same tiny village his whole life with his grandmother, living in a relatively traditional way. And I suppose one of the reasons why I had a dual narrative in the story was so that the climate change element of the story, which whilst is at the heart of the story, isn't necessarily driving the sort of the adventure part of the story, which is of course so important too. The dual narrative allowed me to have the climate change element working along in the background, because Bee and Yutu had such different experiences in terms of how globalized their lives were and how climate change was affecting them. And I suppose overall, as the story progresses, what I wanted to show is that no matter where you might live or how you live your life, we are all connected.
Yeah.
And whatever you do, your actions, be they positive or negative, big or small, will probably have an impact on someone in a different part of the world, which you didn't expect. And I suppose that taps back into that sort of big gestures and small gestures, and how the many small gestures of young people can be just as effective as a grand gesture by government. And I love that sense of empowerment for children in particular, who can feel disempowered because they feel they're too young, you know, to do things and have a voice. And I think it's really important to say that's not the case.
And also, I think after reading Mel, what you get is a sense of community, and that community isn't just the person that lived next door to me, it's everybody on this planet, and how our actions impact on one another. And this, in fact, all of the books, it's just the absolute core of the heart of the books, I think, is that sense of community and what community means. And we do live in a very joined up world now, for good and bad. I mean, here we are on this call, and I've been looking through the messages. We've got people from Australia, Bermuda, Belgium, Canada, where else? another person from Australia, Singapore. I mean, just vast number of people. We really are able to be a community.
And just to Sarah, just to pick up on what Ellie was saying there about connected, I do find in schools with children, I think a question I get asked a lot is, you know, it's all very well you talking about Arctic, you know, melting ice caps and animals here and there. What's that got to do with me here sitting in this, you know, in a city school? And the point I know we would all make is that, just saying, is that that's the point. It's an ecosystem and we're all connected, and tiny actions here can have big effects elsewhere.
Yeah.
And I absolutely love this idea that you're talking about of a community, because I think it's so important to keep the conversation positive as well. And that actually, what could be more positive than building a global community, you know, against climate change?
Kind of just to jump in, because you're right, I did a call this morning with some students in United UAE, and it's like they're living in, you know, huge drought conditions, and it's like the Arctic, like you're saying, Piers, is so far away. But it's that sense of, when I lead the conversations, like, well, we can all save a polar bear, because these tiny little actions that we can take can create a ripple effect and a wave. And yes, of course, it's down to the big corporations and the governments, but like Ellie's saying, is that the sense of empowerment, if each of us can do a little thing, then we can maybe start to influence the governments and the powers by this is what we want, this is what we want to create, and that sense of persuasion by the global community of rising up against the status quo at the moment.
How about research then? I mean, obviously all of the books have a very strong philosophical focus, but you've each got such a real world that you've created. Ellie, how did you research? Because I don't think you visited, did you?
I have been to the Arctic Circle.
Oh, cool.
But I actually wrote this book during lockdown. So I have experienced some of the things that Bea experiences. You know, I've seen the Northern Lights, and I've ridden on a husky sledge, and you have to be careful where you put your head when you've got huskies in front of you. So I have experienced some of the things that she's experienced. But as with all my books, when I'm writing, what I'm really thinking about is the characters and what they're feeling. And that, of course, is something that we all share, those emotions, and getting inside your characters' heads and working out how they're going to respond to a particular situation. But my more specific research from Melt is I have very varied sources, from you know, quite scholarly sources to home videos, and I watched quite a few videos of pilot instructors with their students in two-seater airplanes taking off to try and learn about, you know, flaps up, flaps down, how many knots you have to travel off at before you can take off. So I felt partly qualified to fly a light aircraft. And you learn, I mean, one of the joys for me of writing fiction is research as well, because you become briefly expert in so many things. And I try and remember the things that I've researched, but invariably, you know, I forget some of it. But I learned, you know, how far can a snowmobile go on a full tank of fuel? And when I started to research Inuit culture and Inuit language and Inuit stories, I mean, it's just there's so much to learn, and it's so fascinating. And of course, you want to be respectful of their traditions. And so, you know, for me, that is making sure I learn as much as I can. But of course, as soon as I started researching these things, it was just, you know, how do you stop? And I started learning about, you know, sewing clothes from caribou and seal skin, and how you might have up to sort of 5 layers of footwear in winter, a layer you keep on when you're inside, and then another layer just in case, and then another 3 that you put on and you go out. So I'm quite nerdy, and so for me, research is something that I really, really enjoy. And I also find it very freeing, because the more you know, the more your fiction can take you in interesting directions. You know, those back streets you take, not quite on the main road of your plot. and you don't use everything you learn, but I find that I find it really helpful in sort of enriching the plot in ways I hadn't expected.
Fantastic, thank you. Piers, research and the world of your wonderful novels.
Well, I always do a lot of research, and one of the reasons I love writing these books is it's an opportunity to learn so much that I might not have otherwise. With The Wild Before, it's a prequel to The Last Wild, and I wanted the character to be, without giving too much away, one who does appear in the trilogy later on, and I've always loved hares. And I read some wonderful books about hares and learned amazing things. You know, the fastest land mammal in Britain. They're extraordinary that a female hare can be pregnant with more than one litter at the same time, an extraordinary ability. They're where the Easter Bunny comes from. They used to be worshipped as gods, all this. But I was going to do a lot of practical stuff. I was going to go and immerse myself in the wonderful British countryside and study it. But I delivered a novel that has at its heart a kind of, pandemic breaking out on the eve of an actual pandemic breaking out. And so I was stuck in
during.
Yeah, and I was stuck in my London flat. And so I just surrounded myself with these amazing books on, instead of going to the countryside. Amazing books by people like John Lewis Stemple and Stephen Moss about our wildlife, our wildflowers, our nature. And what was lovely about that was it really kind of, as I was writing it, I was reading these books, and I don't know if people remember last summer, that first lockdown, it was so special. And even in London where I was, there was wonderful, you could smell trees and flowers in a way that I've never smelt before because there was much less air pollution. You could hear birdsong because there weren't planes in the sky. And right at the beginning, in this early spring, it was very quiet because people really were staying at home. We went out for our one walk a day. And I went home, I went out for these walks and in the parks, and I came home to these books, and I felt a connection with nature and the healing power of nature that I've never felt before. It's really extraordinary. So the kind of research became far more real than I'd ever imagined it would be.
Oh, wonderful. It sounds very sustaining and nurturing to have done the research at that time as well. Hannah, Bear Island being a real place.
It is a real place. And I just wanted to comment because I haven't read The Last Before yet, but I read Melt, and Ellie, you're kind of the Inuit culture. I absolutely loved that about your book. It was just so, it was amazing. So detailed and wonderful.
So real, yeah.
Yeah, I really just wanted to comment on that because I really did adore it. We did go to Norway, me and my husband, because I wrote my book in 2019. And so it was before the pandemic even existed. So we were lucky enough to go to Norway, and I love traveling anyway. Obviously there's an element of travel these days. When you're writing a climate fiction book, you also have that sense of responsibility of like, well, if I'm traveling, therefore I'm maybe going on an aeroplane, and there's the contribution. So there's that balancing out of you trying to be your message, but also live your message as well. So there's that sort of contradiction. But we went to Norway, and it was just amazing. We went because my book's set in the midnight sun. And so we had the midnight sun, and it was just magical. Just the all day. So when we're like walking along the bridge in Tromsø at like 2 a.m. and sort of literally skipping because it was just so light. It was like being plugged into a battery. We didn't go to Bear Island because it's so remote and it is really hard to get there. And there really is only a weather station there, and half of it is like conservation. So it's very, very impossible to get there. But I like that. I like the physicality and the visceralness of research for me. That's what really I can do it on the computer, but when I'm there in a place, I can breathe it in, and it's those little things that you can build into the story, then how the air smells, how it really makes you feel, and those are the things I really enjoy, as well as lots of polar bear facts. They can smell for up to 15 miles, they're the biggest carnivore on earth, and their fur isn't really white, it's translucent.
And do they eat peanut butter?
Yes, they do. In my world, yeah. They love seals and peanut butter. And the question I get asked a lot is, have I ever met a polar bear? And the answer is, sadly not. But I would love to go to Svalbard. That's my dream, and it costs a fortune, but I would love to go to Svalbard in a way which is sustainable and just go and see them. Yeah, amazing.
And we've had a couple of questions, and somebody has asked, Catherine Russell has asked, were you influenced by any other authors to write your book about climate change?
I'll just jump in and I say not about climate change, but definitely about animals and the relationship with nature. For me, one of my heroes is Michael Morpurgo. I look up to him. When I'm older, I want to be him. You know, he's like kind of one of my heroes. And so just how he captures his love of nature and his love of children's fiction is just so, it just shines. And he's been in the business so long, and to be at that level and to sustain it, but still absolutely love what he does. And it comes through in his writing and the way he takes children to his farm as well. I just think it's amazing. And the biggest one he probably did in terms of which talked about deforestation, I think it was Running Wild. It was the one with the tsunami and the boy on the elephant. And yeah, so he's my biggest influence in terms of just climate change. I think for all of us maybe is the background, but it's not the driver of the story. The driver of the story is always the characters and the adventure. But you can put that as the background, and that's what I get from Michael Morpurgo.
Piers, who's inspired you as an author? I mean,
so many. So many people have written wonderfully about animals for children's books. People like Richard Adams, and yeah, Michael Morpurgo, as Hannah was saying. But fun enough, with this one, I was more inspired by sort of adult nonfiction, because I felt with The Last Wild, I mean, it sounds an awful thing to say, but I'd written 3 books about children and animals facing climate change, and I did sort of feel I'd probably exhausted everything that I personally had to contribute to the subject. But when Greta came along, that because she was part of a sort of turning point, I think. And I read a book called The Uninhabitable Earth by David Wells, which is a very, very sobering but immaculately researched text about the multiple challenges. And as an adult, it made me want to despair slightly. So I really wanted to write a book about children that was also about the power of hope. And I wanted to try and sort of start reframing, if we could, the conversation we have through fiction about climate change, because it is very bad, and it's lots of it's happening. You know, COVID is a climate change crisis, so we're kind of living through it. But I also wanted to talk about love and dignity and respect, because I think, as also both Hannah and Ellie were saying earlier about how we think about animals, you know, rather than just these things that need to be, these problems that need to be protected or dealt with. And problems tend to sort of like, how do we do it? Crisis, depressing. I want us to start feeling, you know, this kind of sense of connection and love for this planet. Because if we don't start loving it, as opposed to just dealing with it, we are going to be in trouble.
Ellie, inspirations, before I go back to something that Piers has opened up in his answer there.
So probably 2 answers to that question for me. So actually, I was reading non-fiction when I was thinking about Melt, and I was reading a book by Pen Hadow, who is the only person to have traveled from northern Canada to North Pole solo with no support. And I was reading about how he did that and how he managed that was possible to cross the ice. There was still a way over, and he had to float for part of the journey in this sort of wetsuit. It was just incredible. But how that journey soon won't be possible for anybody. And I was reading about that to sort of see how he made that journey and to get a sense of just how cold he was, because obviously I didn't go that far north. And I was also reading, bizarrely, Arabian Sands by Wilfred Bettinger. And I was reading that because it was just gave me such a sense of someone trying to live in the way that the Berber tribes have been living for centuries. someone coming from outside to this experience, this incredible culture. And he stayed with these Berber tribes for many, many years, but never felt that he was worthy of being there with them, although they welcomed him. But it was just incredible, his descriptions of this fragile ecosystem and the survival on, based on where these worlds were and how if the weather changed or if something changed, these traditional cultures that have been living there for centuries, they would die, and they were dying out. And I just found that book so fascinating. And I know it seems strange that it was set in the desert, but there were many themes that sort of came across into Mount. But ultimately, the catalyst for me writing the book was living in Ethiopia for 3 years. And when I moved there with my family, it had just experienced the worst drought for decades, shortly followed by the worst flooding for decades. And the human cost, the loss of crops and livestock, and then damage to wildlife in the countryside, it was just evident everywhere. And that for me was the first time I thought of climate change as climate chaos. And that was the first time it really struck me as a kind of chaos. It's not just heating up, it's these random events that have surprised communities who've been living off the land for many, many years.
Thank you. And as you say, the fact is that climate change affects all parts of the world in lots of different ways. And the choice of the Arctic is one location in this on the globe. I'm really interested in the idea of hope, or the importance of hope, the focus of hope in all of your books. I think, Piers, The Flower of Hope is a hugely important element of your book. And you mentioned just now in your answer as well about how important hope is. Ellie, why don't you tell us how important is hope in the life of your characters, and indeed in children's literature generally, I think?
I feel a responsibility as someone writing, as Piers said earlier, being fortunate enough to write for young people. I feel a responsibility to show them that the world is full of hope. And that's a bigger message to send, but also purely in terms of fiction and writing a novel, hope is what drives you through. Even if it's in the smallest sense or the biggest sense, you always hope characters are going to get together, or you hope something's going to happen, or you are always hopeful for certain events. So I think that hope is wrapped up in fiction in so many different ways, and it has another layer for me in the subjects that I've written about, which have been unintentionally fairly gritty subjects, from Boy 87 to Mount. And for me, in every single book, hope has been the flame that's drawn me to the end, and is what carries the characters through, and I think can carry the reader through as well. Can build the tension and can also provide the resolution. And I think for all these big subjects, there has to be hope, because otherwise, why are we writing about them? And I truly feel that there is hope when it comes to climate change too. And I think, like Piers said, it's about sort of galvanizing this next generation and empowering them to sort of put that hope into some sort of practical application, into activism, into doing something. Thank you
so much, Piers. The Flower of Hope.
Yeah, the Flower of Hope in the book is, I don't give too much away, but the hare who is charged with saving this very unusual and precious animal that's come into their sort of community, and he discovers that the only way to save this animal is to discover this mysterious flower of hope. And I won't say how or if he discovers it, but the more I explored this idea in the story, is that I kind of realized that hope is such a profound emotion and feeling, really. And there are so many different kinds of hope. You know, one might be hopeful that something will happen tomorrow, might be hopeful that eventually we'll get a summer and it will stop raining. But there's also the hope you need when the situation looks very bleak. And it's how we survive and endure, because there is no question that there are going to be, you know, for all the efforts everyone's making, we are about to sail onto some quite rocky waters in terms of this planet's health. And whether it's extreme weather events, more pandemics, food shortages, and so on, climate change wars, and all these things, that we're going to need hope in deep quantities. And because hope really is our best weapon against fear. And that's why it's so important to never let go of hope, because once we give in to fear, then we've begun to lose the battle. As long as we have hope, and it is different to faith. Faith's a very profound feeling too, and you can have faith because you know something, or you know, have evidence, or hope. There is a magical quality to hope, and it mustn't be naive. It mustn't be sort of ridiculous. But when it's genuine, authentic hope, I think it's one of the most sustaining emotions and feelings there are, and it's a wonderful one to explore in a story. And so, yeah, it's very important to me.
Wonderful, thank you so much, Hannah.
I think Piers has just said it so wonderfully, but I think it'd just be like a PS on the end. But I totally agree. I think for me, if we talk about like the emotional scale, if a lot of us sit maybe like fear, and fear leads to apathy, and then apathy just leads to us not doing anything and resignation, and that's a state that I see some young adults being in, or what if we touched on earlier on, what's the point? But if we can shift the emotional scale, and quite often the easiest emotion, or maybe the next emotion we can reach, is hope. Sometimes if I'm having an off day, it's like I can't go from to ecstasy, but I can go to hope. And I think that's what we're all trying to achieve. And not just us on the call, there's lots of writers out there who aren't on this panel who are doing exactly the same things. I want to shout out to them too. And that's what we're trying to achieve, just this energy of hope, which then, like Ellie says, can turn into action. And it's just a better emotional state to be in. And it links back to what Piers is saying about love. And I really see, my book as a love letter to the planet. And love is, I think, an action, and it in itself, but it's an energy that you can pour back into the earth, like you're planting the roots like a love tree, without getting too woo-woo, into the earth. And if you're putting that back in, and we're loving it, and we're creating love, it's just, without sounding trite, it's just a better space to be in, and it creates a better world and hopefully a better future.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you. Well, what next for people? I wonder what's your next projects? What do you see yourselves working on next? Piers, you haven't even published your book yet. Or you?
Give me a chance.
Are you going to carry on writing the in this world that you've created with starting with the Last Wild?
Not this. I think probably this will be it for the Last Wild for now, but it's a world I love, so I may come back to it. But I'm going to continue writing about themes of climate change and our planet, just because I find it, it's so endlessly fascinating. And I sometimes feel that with human stories, there are many, many stories being told about human beings and humans and our life and our emotions and our feelings and our experiences, which help us through life. But when I read a book last year called The Overstory by Richard Powers, which I recommend everyone, it's a grown-up story, I recommend everyone read, which really puts trees at the heart of the narrative. And you think, my goodness, these incredible organisms that have been on the planet for so long, longer than us in many cases, the stories they could tell, because trees talk to one another and connect with one another. And so I'm not saying it's going to be about trees, but there's a world of nature diversity out there that we have only just, I think, in fiction, begun to explore as writers. And I just can't wait to write about it more.
So the important themes remain in amongst your
Yeah.
wonderful characters and your great adventures.
Yeah, but always something that children can relate to, but trying to open a window into that sometimes mysterious world of nature for them.
Ellie, what are you up to?
I was just going to say, actually, when Piers was talking about trees, I remember reading Lord of the Rings, and is it the trees, the Ents?
The Ents, yeah.
And I know that many people found other, will find other elements of Lord of the Rings sort of, the thing that they're most interested in. But for me, the Ents were just this amazing character in the story. And it was the first time I'd ever read a book with a character as a tree. And I still, that just popped into my head just now. And I haven't read Lord of the Rings for years, but it made such an impression on me. Anyway, I digress. So I am writing something that's going to be set actually for the first time for me in the UK. Am I allowed? Yes. Am I allowed to say any more about it now, Sarah? Maybe not.
Do you? Is it embarking on important themes? Are we seeing the continuation of the importance of your books from Boy 87, Lost, Melt? They're great adventures with wonderful characters, with the theme kind of.
Yes, I have once more discovered that at the heart of this story there's a theme that I really care about, and that is often the seed for my stories is something that I really care about. And it started with the refugee crisis in Boy 87, and now with this new book that I'm writing, there is another theme that is something that's very current and very close to my heart, and is sort of tied into the stories that we hear on the news, and whether or not we know if those stories are true. And I find that that's a big issue for children these days, especially for teenagers these days. Something that we have relied on as a resource for so long, and we've always thought we've known where the good news has come from or where the bad news is coming from. And I think those lines have become blurred. And I think that it's very hard to navigate facts, news, sources of information nowadays for children, because they aren't coming from these sort of trusted institutions, and there's so much available. How do you make decisions about what is true and what is not? There, I've got quite a serious question tonight. So that's sort of the seed, like the seed of what I was thinking about when I started writing this book that I'm writing.
Thank you for that sneaky insight. We won't push you for more. Hannah, what about you?
I can say a little bit. The book too is about the grey whales off the coast of California and their migration from the Arctic down to the Mexican lagoons. This is just before lockdown. I snuck in another holiday, which was to the lagoons in Mexico where the grey whales go and mate and have their calves. So there's a little bit about plastic pollution, but that's not, I think there's a lot of plastic pollution books out there. So that's not the main theme. Without giving too much away, it perhaps might be to do with the fishing industry and the debris that they leave and the impact that that's having on our marine life. But if for me, the environment and the animals it's my first love. It's before I am a writer, but I think first and foremost, I'm someone that cares about the planet. So for me, that will always come through. And I'd love to become an advocate and just go to these places and just do it on a bigger level. Like I'm part of the community here with the climate group for the council and things like that. So it's just like, it's not just talking about it. I want to walk it as well, and just be the best that I can be and live the best life that I can live, which means not just about the life that Hannah Gold lives, but the impact that I can create and inspire to those around me as well.
Thank you.
So yes.
Which we have 5 minutes, and that leads me to my last question for each of you is, why did you become a writer? Hannah, what was the thing that made you decide that you were going to start putting it down on paper for people to read?
think probably like most commonly, it was just always the dream I had, and I loved reading when I was younger. I had a brief flirtation with wanting to be a vet, but my maths and my science is so bad, and I don't think I could put an animal down. Like, I'm so sensitive when I go to the vets, I'm always in tears. And so yeah, it just was like my love of reading, and at school it was the one area that I really shone in, I suppose. And I don't know, it's like, why do I breathe? It's kind of like, if that was always the thing I wanted to do. It took me a while to get my breakthrough in terms of this book, but perseverance, and then choosing the story that you love, and just being bold enough to tell your heart's desire, and being you on the page. And quite often you realize, hey, that's enough, and other people feel the same way as you do. And yeah, that's what's happening with Bear.
Yeah, thank you so much, Hannah. Piers, what was the motivation to picking up that pen in the first place?
I think it's that sense that I've always had, that just there are some thoughts and feelings that can't be expressed in any other way. They're not really ideas that can be just simply explored in conversation, or something as straightforward as, a blog, here's my thoughts, or a tweet. Or, there were things that I just felt that I think there are things you want to express about your relationship to the world, that if you don't express them, keep knocking away, certainly in my case, at your brain. And a story really is the best way to kind of try and make your own sense of those thoughts, but then hopefully out of them carve something that might be of interest to other people. And certainly I think the primary job of any writer with any book, above anything else, is provide a little window of liberty from your day and your life, just a chance to be in someone else's world, in another place, another dimension, another animal, whatever it is, just that moment of freedom and perspective. And it's a two-way street. The writer gets perspective by the writing, because you discover things about yourself and the subject you're writing, and hopefully in doing that there's a kind of reflective mirror thing goes on, where the reader discovers that too, and the reader and the writer meet in this extraordinary abstract space that none of us can ever reach.
The read, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a real relationship, and it happens over time and space, and it's a really, I don't want to, Hannah said, get woo-woo about it, but I do think there's something magical about it. And again, magic is something that's a little short on the ground these days, or can be, and I love that. I'm very, that connection is very precious.
Thank you very much. Ellie?
So it was never my intention to write myself. For many, many years, I was a children's book editor for 14 years. And sometimes people would ask me if I thought I might write a book. And I thought of myself as an editor, the other side of the coin, helping authors to make their books as good as they could be. And the motivation for me was it was having a story that I really felt I needed to tell, I wanted to tell. And it came sort of out of the blue. Once we were living in Ethiopia, and I was seeing these news reports with boats, overcrowded boats crossing the Mediterranean to try and reach safety, and hearing only about how many people on these boats and how dangerous the journey was that they were making. And I just wanted to hear about who was on these boats and why. And living in Ethiopia at the time, which was one of the biggest hosts for refugees on the continent, and also many refugees were flowing out of Ethiopia, I could see that this is massively complex situation. And that for me was the absolute catalyst, this story that I wanted to tell. And that's how it began, with a blank page one day, and then suddenly I'd written a book.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, everybody. Hannah, Piers, Ellie, thank you so much for your thoughts.
Thank you
for introducing us to your worlds, and for the magic that you've shared with us tonight, because like you, Piers, I believe that reading is a magical experience, and I'm sure we all believe it's an empowering fulfilling, enriching experience. And your books, each of your books are giving readers so much thought, so much insight, but above all, so much adventure and great characters with the other stuff coming with them. They're not polemics, they're wonderful, wonderful works of fiction. And as an avid reader, I'm very grateful for them. So thank you very much for joining us this evening. And
Thank you, Sarah.
People who are watching.
Lovely to see you all.
So
Thank
much.
you.
I'm so impressed that we've got literally hundreds of people on this chat. Thank you very much. And thank you for your questions. And good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.